it is preparing us for live stream. But I think the next student can begin.
Give me a second, Kristy.
Thanks, Henry.
Okay, so hi, I'm Henry, and this is the Brettis Manifesto. So in short, I'm interested in harnessing the qualities of...
Hey, Henry, sorry to interrupt, but I can barely hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I mean, kind of. Is that just me, you guys, or is it?
True,
No.
I also
No,
don't hear you.
you're very soft,
Okay.
Henry. And Kristy too.
Yeah, you both.
I have no idea why.
Hello, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Okay,
Perfect.
sorry. Sounds good. Okay, let me just restart. So hi, I'm Henry, and this is the Brettis Manifesto. So in short, I'm interested in harnessing the qualities of bread and applying them within an architectural context. So like, why bread? Bread has certain universal qualities such as familiarity and ubiquity, yet it remains hyperlocational and embedded within and is defined by socio-political connotations, not unlike architecture. Through a narrative that is historically based but includes a healthy amount of fictional speculation, I hope to show that these baked goods in the built world aren't as far apart as they may seem, and that perhaps this approach of thinking more like a Brettis can reveal new modes of working. So first, some historical context. Here we see Egyptians bringing grain to a granary circa 2050 BCE. Already we see that there's a built infrastructure of bread production, understanding of processes such as fermentation and enabling local forms of bread making, and that this is happening simultaneously across all cultures. With the Enlightenment comes a scientific method that allowed for the discovery of microorganisms and the codification of bread making. In Diderot's encyclopedia, we see the layout of the bakery enabling the serial production of bread, a process that is defined by its steps and the objects that enable them. The Industrial Revolution and the creation of sliced bread speaks to our post-Fordist reality, where Wonder Bread is as universally and rapidly distributed as the apartment block typology. In this model by Jesse Reiser, we see a geometric form that in aggregate resembles a singular loaf, but is composed of slices, each distinct and with autonomy, hinting that within each individual bounding box, there could exist any number of possible programs embedded within its crusty exterior. And so this is my breadboard, where I'll be telling the history of the Brettis ideology through a series of exploratory models that each explore a point of comparison or feature enabled. Brettis ideology is predicated on attributes that are endemic to bread as a medium. Brettis would likely consider a deviation from breadiness as a departure from their values and would consider an attempt to mask these qualities as sacrilege. The potential for success or failure in these architectural explorations will be judged based on these tenets. So I'll open this up and feel free to choose your own adventure, but I'd just like to start off with one. And let me quickly scroll through all of the choices. Okay. So talk about this one. So for the 1914 World's Fair in Lyon, France, 3 Italian futurists, Mario Ciatone, Giacomo Mattetrucco, and Giuseppe Taragni were invited to present speculative work regarding the future of urbanism. Unfortunately, due to a clerical error, only one, Giacomo, was given gallery space. While commiserating over lunch, Mario glimpsed a child feeding the insides of a baguette to a flock of pigeons. Turning to his colleagues, he proposed combining their 3 models into a singular one by embedding each of their works within the only material they had on hand, bread. Here you see a modern-day reconstruction. In the first bay, Mario, a deeply religious man, proposes invigorating a derelict church by inserting housing units that would acknowledge their respective forms. Giacomo proposed city skyways that would allow vehicles to travel with great speed above ground. And Giuseppe, who is an avid skier, proposed tenement buildings that allowed for the interface of mountain and city grid. And each of these has its own sort of little backstory, but I'd be happy to open it up to the floor if anyone wants to pick one in particular.
I don't know if we're used to these pick your own adventures, Henry, but I'll pick scale.
Okay. So I can read a little background. So in 1934, a 23-year-old L. Ron Hubbard was camping in Joshua Tree when he came under the effects of heat syncope. Dazed and confused, he experienced a hallucination of a levitating monolith interspersed with fissures that radiated heat. It felt alive, he said, like the collective voice of an entire civilization living within a protective rind. Only beings of extraterrestrial origin could have the resources to elevate such megastructures. 16 years later, having never forgotten that experience, Ron founded the Church of Scientology to spread the gospel of our alien origins. So I basically wrote a narrative for each thing, but each of them explores a particular architectural aspect that I'd like to explore. So feel free to have me flesh it out outside of the narrative blurb.
No, I think it's a very, very unique project, very unique. Yeah. You see, I would like to, at least perhaps more out of interest, to understand the relationship that you started in the beginning. Yeah. You know, the link between the bread as a prototype for architecture. You know, you said the bread represented for you something. It was a kind of, what was it, social political
Yeah.
idea? Because in the end, you're totally right. It had the same evolution, yeah, perhaps, yeah, in our world of industrialization, yeah, than a building had, yeah. You know, they also became a mass product, yeah, a craft and things. So I think there's a really interesting. I would be interested in this parallelness, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and how you link them. And I don't know. Do you have you been in the Broad Museum? Do you
Yeah.
know the?
Yeah, I've been to the Broad.
So I would be no. I mean there's the German word for bread is Brot, and the Kopimmerblau did a museum, yeah, for a bread owner, and he has a bakery, and he collected over all his life, yeah, everything related to bread, yeah. And Kopimmerblau did a museum for them. Have you ever heard about that? They made a kind of Wunderkammer for bread, yeah.
I don't think so.
Uh,
Is the building by Coop where it's a pedestal with like
yeah,
kind of bread? That's the one you're talking about?
yeah, and so the person is a bread collector, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it was that's why I got interested. I think I got interested in your idea what bread does as an object in a cultural field, yeah, and what architecture does, and what happens when you merge them, or how do you, yeah, or when one moves into the other, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would be interested in that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it started with certain attributes that I wanted to kind of highlight. And so I kind of wrote a manifesto for myself as a way of kind of thinking about sort of writing the rules for my own way of exploring things. So the thing that's interesting about bread, I just highlighted a couple of things, is that there's something of a consistent starting point for each exploration, that bread is this universal thing that we can all latch onto. It has this ability to kind of, I'm saying, define the degree to which periphery concerns are considered, and that there's this kind of strangeness where you have a loaf and that you can excavate it and that you can kind of slice it and cut it, and you can kind of pick and curate sort of what you want to reveal in that sense. There's also the fact that it's tactile. That was important. I wanted to work with a material that reacts to, you know, moisture and mold and heat, and it couldn't just be completely simulated. And on that point, that it being a living thing, that these models would decay and collapse and expand. And lastly, there's deeply sort of iconographic qualities to bread. The fact that it's a staple food, right? It's necessary in a way to sort of the goings on of public life. I included a little image to Marie Antoinette, just, let them eat cake. The idea that like this underlying bread that bread holds sort of the underlying like grip of society together. And these are sort of attributes that I wanted to see if by working with this that I could sort of move into architecture, or sort of qualities that I admired about this medium that I wanted to apply within an architectural context.
I mean, I too like, I think it's like super interesting and really well positioned and articulated and explained thesis. I mean, first, when you were discussing it, I thought, for some reason, it reminded me of the Education of an Architect, Cooper Union, kind of like late 80s idea of this super kind of internal disciplinary ideas that were going to make, I don't know, architecture out of like things that you would never expected. Then you think you're kind of moving into other, milieus, and I think the models that you have and the way that you could actually completely go in different directions and let the users actually choose, it's an interesting one. I was much more interested in the ones the one Kristy chose, or in the other, in the baguette that is excavated, or in the other sort of chunky model that has actually always fascinated me in terms of the section, this one. I'm less interested in the one that is abstract, where you're kind of crashing the bread with the 9 square grid and so on. It seems, that one, I don't know, it seems like, without having seen it, it seems a little forced. But, I was just thinking like, where would you, I mean, you've got already a lot of material and this is ready to go. How will you sort of like somehow connect it, or, or bring it to fruition? Is it like, right now, it's like actual bread. It's like ready-made, bread you found, and you're just, putting buildings. Is there something you will design, like, I imagine like what it would like bread will look like as a kind of material in real scale, or I don't know, or like other masses that you will come up with it, or would you actually like implant these things and design your own bread? I mean, thinking of like Michael Young and Kutan's, sort of collages of like replacing certain things on sort of famous, paintings and so on. I mean, it's just thinking like, where, given what you're right now, which I think it's great, where will you take it to create sort of maximum kind of a, exposure and impact?
Well, I think it goes back to the original sort of impetus for working with bread was I wanted to sort of create these fictional worlds that I found interesting, but I wanted to give myself sort of a physical limiter, and that's what the sort of bread model has provided. Working with bread, it's actually a terrible model material if you're looking at it from a bread perspective. Is that kind of limitation has also is something that has kind of shaped the way I sort of put these models together. And so going forward, digitizing and breaking them down, and I want to get back to showing off their interiors, the idea that this is like a vessel for all these possible worlds, homes, sort of, like ways of interacting. I'd like to, I'd like to show in sort of more of a, say, drawing or render of the kind of the insides of these things that it would cut, but it'd be sort of bounded by this actual physical thing that exists.
I do think that's, I do think more development could be made on each of these kind of models, and it just seems like, for me, there's the boundary of the bread, and there's a lot of white space, and then there's the architecture, and I do wonder what that white space could possibly be, and can the architecture get a little bready, or can bread get a little more archy? I don't know. I'm just wondering if right now they seem to coexist, but they don't seem to kind of play off of each other so much. And I do wonder if there's one model that you could, and maybe that's a terrible idea, I'm not sure, but it hasn't felt like it's been pushed yet.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add to that. You see, it reminded really a little bit to Hernan's work about beef, where he takes a ritual, and turn a local ritual and turns it into an architectural device, like the slicing. So it comes from a cultural in heritage, but it moves the ritual into architectural operations. And I found that also intriguing when you said that, that it is a cultural product. It has a certain means of how it is made. Some people, for example, the baguette, you know, in France is slided in diagonals, yeah, while, for example, the toast is slided culturally differently. So, something, I think there is a little bit, and perhaps it adds a little bit to Jenny, something more of your initial statement. There's a cultural attitude, yeah, that is part that could turn into architectural operations, yeah, which I think you are totally already hinting there that the toast bread is sliced and the baguette is, yeah. But I think there is a little bit of that that could come to the forefront, that cultural aspect of the local, or not local, but to the ritual, yeah, that operates within the context. Yeah, and perhaps they don't change even the designs. Perhaps you're totally right, yeah, that they have the right cuts. But I think I would not underestimate that in your story.
Absolutely.
I don't know, yeah. Is it, for example, the rolled, the croissant that is rolled, yeah, versus, you know, the bread that is baked and the toast bread in a mold, yeah. You know, I think it's yeah.
Absolutely.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'll look into it.
Awesome. Any other thoughts or questions, Henry?
No, actually, it was a lot of good feedback.
Yeah, it was. I really like the idea of thinking about the geometry of the cuts of the bread in relation to like different regions. That could be really useful to help organize things as we move towards the end.
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh.
Hey, Henry, I just wanted to say one thing about, maybe not about the project and the stuff that we're looking at, but I think it would be really cool if you identified, because you're so well-spoken and smart, clearly, if you identified for us the realm in which you're working and the effects that you want to create in the end, or like, let's say the impact that you want to create, not the effects, the impact that you want to create with your work, and sort of help a jury at the final understand that this is playful, yes, it seems kind of Instagrammable, yes, but that you're after something deeper. And I know you kind of touched on it when you were talking, but I think it's important that you identify this as almost a new method of practice, or a new form of making architecture more clearly, because we don't, I think like we could easily start to criticize your project based on, well, you know, are you serious? And are we really going to put this in a site, this baguette? And is this a, you know, real world project? And, you know, I clearly think you want to control that discussion and not let it get there. But if you're going to say that, like, this is not that, and this is not meant to be built like this, it's not that kind of architectural project, but it is meant to operate in this realm. And this is a different way of giving the architect agency, I guess. I would just try to really hit hard on that. Set the stage for your project before you show us the project, basically.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's a really good idea.
And Peter's right. Any precedents you can throw out there of architects operating this way would be really cool and set the mood a little bit.
I just reminded me also on the lecture of, I hope I spell her name like Jennifer Boomer, you know, from her Hamburg, you know, and I mean, it's not unimportant that there is the idea that the cultural daily ordinary object, yeah, you know, that shares by everyone, you know, I think that's to me where the thesis lies, that the ordinary goes into a culture, you know, it turns it into a cultural object. And I think that's where the power lies to me in them, yeah? Because like you say, we all share it, it's all common to us, yeah? But it moves it into a cultural project. I think that's the really intriguing thing.
Absolutely. Thanks for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Henry.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Irvin, you're up next.
Hi, can everyone hear me, by the way? Okay, cool. Just a heads up, there's going to be some audio in the beginning, so if you don't hear it, just let me know and I'll adjust that.
Like they should be figuring out how people actually use space and then designing those spaces in a way that will accommodate those uses.
That the basic thing that we need in Compton is a more unified effort on the part of all of the organizations, all of the citizens, the commerce, the industry, and the city government towards developing a spirit of pride of community and a spirit of pride in the appearance of our community.
As I mentioned, gentrification is not the same as revitalization. Revitalization refers to neighborhood change, improvement, upgrading, but it's done from the bottom up. It's usually done with community residents and community organizations, often with the help of public and private sector, but they're improving housing, attracting businesses to the corridor, making the neighborhood safe and clean.
To take us out of the box. Literally and figuratively, we live in boxes. We leave the womb when we're born and get put directly into the tomb. We get put directly into our first square space, which is the beginning of us going from being multi-dimensional and completely imaginative to placed onto a grid.
Hi, so space is perceived through the accumulation of objects, and architecture quantifies that through these sort of X, Y, and Z planes. And when space is limited by outside conditions, such as size limitations, zoning, and context, it's defined as a bounding box. But what happens if that bounding box evolves over time and its only pursuit is now the long-term development of the communities that reside? Communities like Compton, honestly. So in the practice of architecture, we tend to convert the bounding box into the initial object, creating a singular act. An example being the sort of court building in downtown Compton that you're looking at. So my thesis introduces a new terminology, the zealot. The zealot is a series of incremental upgrades that believe in the revitalization through density, an act of multiplicity. Floating through space as they gradually inhabit the given bounding box, its formal qualities are multifaceted and only highlight flatness when the zealot decides to smash along the bounding box. These forms promote a sort of dynamism in both interior and exterior conditions, thrashing through its realm, nesting, standing, and even embedding in its evolving boundaries. Its zeal is uncompromising in the pursuit of collage in the bounding box. So at the community scale, the barbershop along Acacia Street in Compton is formally, I'd say, stuck in its old zoning limitations. If you look closely, it's a barbershop in the back, and then you got a salon or beauty store in the front. And this space essentially, or this bounding box between these two buildings is being divided by a parking lot that hasn't been used since 2008. Over time, though, this community develops its facade, but the density within the bounding box has stayed the same. So I introduced a zealot, an upgrade through density. Its bounding box was originally tailored to single-family zoning, a resultant of the sort of white middle-class suburbia. But as Compton developed, so has its zoning regulations, classifying now to sort of CL, or you could say sort of mixed-use zoning. The zealot develops with this increased height restriction by first filling in the vacant sort of parking space that bridges this hair community, and by the second and third zealot, bringing itself upward to stack on the pre-existing buildings. It's sort of starting with a bridge and then expanding the salon, the beauty school with the next 2 zealots added. In elevation, the crop and sort of taper, both terms refer to barbershop haircuts, are sort of qualities and the facets that the zealot promotes, yet creating harsh lines and edges that when hitting the bounding box, plans sort of reveal combinations at even an interior scale. And at all scales, these crisp edges where the zealot rests and faceted moments of activity reveal at even the scale of a room. In areas, it's the pre-existing bounding box, so you can kind of see where that red sort of hits at that corner in contrast to the blue. And then in others, forcibly pushing past it. So highlighting that the zealot can actually perform at different scales. The spatial conditions of the zealot are not merely a sort of thesis on massing, but a conversation of frames and the collage of architecture at any given vanishing point. And at these vanishing points reveal flatness, but at other moments, a sort of multifaceted behavior, allowing new connections on pre-existing components. So the sort of building hovering over the pre-existing building at certain areas. And if the evolving scale of the bounding box is truly the only variable in the zealot, then invested further at the civic scale is a site across Compton's federal building. In 2020, the architecture that resides in this massive bounding box is only an extrusion, hosting a series of local businesses, and if you look on your left, like a bodega. So, and with its bounding box also being upgraded like the previous site to 75-foot height limit and an increased square footage size, this investigation continues on the possibilities on what the zealot may perform at multiple scales. Characterizing at forms that push inward and outward, its faceted behavior is a result of this extending and shifting, while flat at faces it deems important. In a series of massing studies, the zealot starts off with the watchtower that sort of kicks off and hits at the top face, and the second zealot being a main visitor center. So these are sort of incremental things that are being added over time. The zealot chooses at this scale to be uncompromising at certain faces of the box, adding a park and walkway that punctures beyond the initial sort of ground level of the bounding box. And at its left side, smashing the next 2 zealots along the face, but having one arm sort of poke out and rest itself on the library, emphasizing that the zealot now sees the community library as a part of its programmatic theme, speculating that the bounding box had grown further by this stage. And the zealot being the proponent of the long-term development, what follows are a series of community and sort of visitor centers that promote the localness that the original extrusion started in a series of shops. The zealot finalizes this as a collage, adding and either highlighting or determining the legitimacy of these frames. The zealot is a fanatic in this case, uncompromising in the long-term development of one's community. Its boundaries are merely moments that highlight the negotiation of the neighborhood grid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Irvin, amazing presentation. I'm just in and out, so
thank you. Thanks, thank you.
You know, I perhaps I don't know. I think first of all, I think it's a very unique representation. Yeah, I think it has a very, it comes across with very interesting images, and I don't know, but there is something very interesting that if you look in certain works that I've seen, there was an idea. Should I understand it? It's a critique on the bounding box, or yeah, on the generic space. Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm just reading in the moment some of the work of Georges Bataille. And you look at that some of the architects that were attacking this idea of the generic modernist space, yeah, the box. The alternative was something which they called a labyrinth, what he called a labyrinthic space, you know, a space that has a labyrinth, yeah, that is not, doesn't have that modernist idea, of the box. It's the space that allows to produce new life. Yeah, like a foley, new events that were not there before. Is that how I should understand your work? That the reason why this architectural object looks so unique because it wants to overcome, I think there's a really historically interesting context, of that labyrinthic space, that is against the generic space of modernism, it's an anti-economic space. It's a human space, for triggering events that were not there before. I don't know, perhaps I misread your work, but this is when I thought this is the vibe in which it is thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great presentation and super well articulated. I think the way that you kind of managed to connect issues of policy, I couldn't read exactly the land use quote, from ideas of urban renewal to kind of ground up development from sort of communities as opposed to sort of top down from the government. I think they're super, super interesting and critical issues, these days, for Compton or elsewhere. And I love the way you kind of show the barbershop. I was thinking it's like an architect had to design that because there was a sort of very symmetrical facade with a sort of weird section. I mean, nothing amazing for sure, but in the context, at least pretty stout. I love the way you're kind of, beginning to sort of mass out the species. I mean, it's a very peculiar language and super interesting forms with like conical shapes and certainly faceted. I wonder what the effect on, my question to you would be like, especially because the sort of social connotation that the project has, in the way you launch your presentation, what the relationship of all this will have with the ground, often we tend to think of sort of this kind of elevated architecture as radical, and they are seemingly radical when they exist, as a kind of as icons, as imaginary. But then they have often very little actually effect on the actual ground. I remember visiting the Panam building, early on, and also reading later Kulha's critique of it, which is like, for all its radicality and the view on the city, it's super, super hard to find later. You could completely miss it, when you're actually on the ground. And I don't think this will be the effect, of your project, because it actually crosses over. But I think, maybe this is something you have to consider as well, in terms of like how we will approach the ground, how we actually will engage those specific moments where, I don't know, people movement on the streets. And I mean, I will bring it back there. And maybe I will be less interested in the problematic of the interior, which is interesting, but it seemed to me a little off center of your approach.
I see.
Yeah, I would also jump on that. I think the intro was really really successful, and it really sets me in that kind of zone of also thinking about this life in Compton with the barbershop, and there was another program, can't remember, but
community center.
A community center, and then I do maybe just also thinking through with like less than a month left, and now where you land right now, like it's harder for me to project what that means to this community. It seems like you set it up that you do care about that, and I wonder what is the character of what you have proposed and how you imagine that. And I agree. I'm not sure it's about the interior. It seems like it's very much about this kind of maximizing the exterior that you're setting up here. Mm-hmm. And one other thing would be like, I wonder right now, you treat the zealot as like almost everything is similar in scale in terms of the pieces, and that it has that kind of aggregated approach, does it ever change in scale, or does it ever, I mean, it can still do the same thing. I just wonder why it's sort of a very similar scale pieces.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I was sort of looking at it programmatically, like essentially like if the bounding box in plan, if you see that as the building, then you know, in like a typical building plan, you'll see a you know, square box, and then when you cut it from plan, you'll see the rooms that are divided by a series of walls. So when I was looking into how the scale of some of these zealots, especially at the larger scale, I was sort of questioning the need for walls when I start getting into the interior of these pieces. And so they're at that scale to sort of answer any sort of programmatic issues that might come up. So like if there's like theaters or like mass, like or spaces where mass amounts of people would sort of be at, and things of that nature. So I think scale is actually, the scale of the zealot itself is maybe a result of that.
Yeah, I think I don't know, Irvin, if you know the work of Lebbeus Woods and others, yeah,
Yes.
that have placed their work as a critique against the rational Cartesian space. And I think you're totally right. The idea of all that was, how can a building become not only a privatized object but it becomes a public space, you know, like a new public space. And I think programming, yeah, was very important for some of that work. You know, I remember, you know, that the program had to be a public program, you know, and so basically the whole building became actually an urban sculpture, yeah, so that you could go into it. And I think this idea that the building is not only an extrusion, but is a public space in itself, yeah, that's I think the program is important. So what is in there, you know, and that is a new life actually. Yeah, and I think that's why the renderings are cool. You know, perhaps there are things that are unexpected, you know, that have not a commercial function but are public function. There was a lot of invention of program. I could imagine that could be also interesting, that you think about what could be in there, yeah. To invent a program.
I see.
I think the public space that that you're working on, this idea of kind of like maintaining the existing. So you're not tearing anything down, but you're bridging across things and really enlivening the space in between, which, like you said, is just kind of a desolate parking lot right now. I think that's really strong. It's a really good idea, and I could imagine that happening at a lot of different scales. And I totally understand it, especially in certain kinds of neighborhoods where all of the kind of dead space between things creates a kind of a deadness to the pedestrian level of the street. So I totally get that. It would be great if you could maybe think about doing an image, and maybe one of these images is that already, but an image of what that space is like. I mean, again, I think maybe these two images down below on the left are that, but showing the fact that you're in between two worlds, you're in between existing buildings. I mean, really, this is an adaptive reuse project. So you're in between two buildings, the existing fabric of the city, and then this new thing, and it's roofed over. So it encloses the space, but maintains those two worlds. And I think that's really cool. And it's in your project. I just think you could show it better and work on that empty space below it more. Then I would be more convinced. But it's really cool. And the way that you presented it today, I thought was very clear, and I really appreciated that. The only thing that I would give some more thought to, because you have time to do it, is when Peter's mentioning Lebbeus Woods, and I think I mentioned that the last review that you had, but also I would say now on this on the elevation drawing, I'm also thinking today a little bit about Lebbeus, but even more about Neil and maybe Wes Jones. And I'm just putting all of these references together a little bit in my head, and I'm thinking, no, like I don't think that's the kind of references that you want to have. So just like even the light green that Neil used to use more, and the shapes and some of the stuff, particularly in elevation. I would give it some more thought. Like what kinds of things, like is there any space in here for figuration? Is there any space for other kinds of approaches to what a facade might be? And I wonder if there aren't some hints that you can get from looking at some of these. It looks like you've done some framing of some local facades and some kind of image collection and collages and other kinds of things. And I'm just wondering if there isn't in some of that source material some stuff you could work on to change the feeling of this as a kind of aloof abstraction on the facade that feels definitely connected to the early work of Neil and Wes to me, and really have something that feels like it's totally in lockstep with your interests. Might be cool, up to you, but that's just the one thing that throws me out of the zone when I see it. I'm in the zone, and then I see that, and I'm like, oh, well, okay, so it's like Neil doing a rooftop project. And I don't want to think that. I want to be totally in on your projects.
Yeah, those are good points, Tom.
Yeah.
I think like going further, like for example, like this massing has no windows. So as I like develop apertures and think about the material qualities that might happen at a different scale, that's definitely something. So that, like I will say very clearly that all the people you listed are huge influences in the work I do. And I think that instead of like, but the way I'm positioning it is that it's still relevant today because of the fact that these conditions haven't been adjusted yet. So there's an opportunity for like sort of new ideas, essentially, is what I'm trying to promote. So I think that when I develop the second building further, that voice can be seen more.
I just think before you even start designing on it, just try to figure out like what are all the options in front of you for developing it, like you say, like, are you interested at all in any way in reflecting local culture in this thing? Are you interested in any way as it being legible of what's on the interior? Are you know what I mean? There's like a whole list of things that you can go down to basically theorize what an elevation is in your architecture.
I see.
And I think before you start sort of designing it and letting in all the influences, which of course we all do and we all have influences, I think setting a position for yourself of like what you want it to be before you do it will help you then identify if you're doing it as you work.
I see.
So anyway, yeah.
Perhaps it might not fit to the thesis. I know. Sorry, Kristy, go.
Oh no, I was just gonna say last comment. So you close it out, Peter.
No, I just meant it more general. I think that what I see really interesting is there was a moment in history after the '68 revolution where you could see how different practitioners have taken the same subject, yeah? And I think it's interesting to see that there were different positions, One was about pure abstraction, basically, like architecture should be nothing, yeah? The other one was architecture should go back, by a kind of vernacular or a culture. And the other one was radically new programming. Yeah, sometimes it's interesting to see, even when you think these people the references that you might be interested come from the same time period, they might have a totally different agenda, yeah, even when it looks similar. Yeah, I think there's a beautiful critique, for example, of OMA to Archizoom, yeah? Even when it looked radical, it was actually a back to the village idea, against the city, yeah? And I think there's interesting that these nuances could be interesting to just revisit. It's more like not something for the thesis now, but just to be aware of that context, yeah? That happened already once, that I think your work fits very well, yeah, in how to engage into a new public in-between space.
I see. Yeah, those are good points.
Awesome.
For the future.
Yeah, those are great comments. Thank you very much, Irvin.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the feedback, guys.
Okay, Junkai.
Hi.
That's
Yeah. Okay, let me share my screen. Sorry. Okay, can you see it?
Yes, it's not full screen yet. There
Okay.
you go.
Okay. Hi, my name is Junkai. I'm interested in housing. It's something between the single family house and the large apartment complex. And the client is a retirement age couple and two college age children. They will each form their own small family in the future, with the design to face in the interaction of three dwelling in one house. Each of them are independence and dependence, which also show the sustainability and the forward-looking of architectural design. And the project accommodate for the range of dependence and the independence relationship that we have throughout our lifetime, and see both as valuable. And the educational toys that children use in the childhood, such as a building block, carry many memories of childhood and give me a lot of inspiration. The mode of thinking is more flexible. And the side of the house on Jefferson Avenue is to the south is a large residential area. The site is close to the metro and the bus station with the convenient transportation. And the less urban street space also carry the memories of the surrounding resident. And the combination of the new building has many unpredictable ability and is affected by many factories. And from the site, the texture of the urban street space is extracted as a constituent element of this new residence. And just like children play with the toy, put their new parts in a box and shaken readily. The form parts become the main buildings by staking building block. And the spatial shape create a lot of possibility for the shape space, such as a lot of extreme space with a small scale, promote interaction across family units. At time, paganize children over adult and allow space to get away for naps, reading, meditating. Today, a lot of our interactions are throughout our device and do not have the same spatial requirements. And just like frame being John Malkovich on the 7 and a half floor of the office building, people bend over to work. And in a low-rise space, adults have to bend over and sit on the ground to communicate with children. In such a extreme space scale, is very friendly and comfortable for children. And see the animation. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
I have to say, it's an interesting housing project, and I want to just know if I understand it right. When you mixed everything, you know, like the nice, beautiful shaker animation, yeah?
Yeah.
And then you come with your last images where you put the things together, yeah? Do you understand it right? The first envelope is a division between what is public and what is private, and the second envelope is then the house, but the house also has rooms and an outdoor space. So do I understand it right that usually an apartment building are joined together by a staircase, yeah? So you're not only expanding the staircase into a public space, you also consider the house in itself as being a twofold between something being private and something being public. I found it as a housing project interesting. I don't know if I understood that right, but I always thought that when you came with the last animation where you made this first boundary, I thought that was the idea of a three-dimensional public circulation space, and then you came with the second boundary. Yeah, you see here, this is what, yeah, you see the second boundary, and then you put the rooms into that second boundary. So I thought these are the houses, and then in the houses, you had also rooms and a public space. I found it a very interesting housing project, yeah? Yeah, between what is collective space, was it private space? So there's a degree of collectivity, yeah? The collective in the family, the collective in the house, the collective in the block. Yeah, I found it an intriguing housing project, if I understood it right.
Is that correct? Are these each of the orange thing a separate family house, or is that all one house?
It is like we have a 3-family unit, and we will combine in one house, just like this one. So we have a 3-family unit, and we will use the same communal space, but we will but every family members will living in their themselves provide space, just like the bedroom.
So it's like the family in itself also lives like the whole community.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think like like those 3 orange rooms are quote unquote their house, but it's important that they are individual rooms themselves. I think, if I understand, yeah.
I want to kind of, I mean, I think it's interesting presentation, and maybe, I mean, again, take it or leave it. Of course, you know, you always have to filter through comments, but I'm personally much more interested in the process, you know, of like analyzing the blog, how you manage to extract the kind of voids between voids and solids, and then somehow codifying them in different colors, and then beginning to lift them up. And I'm with you up to that. But whenever you sort of, I mean, even though I buy the putting them in the box and shaking them and so on, but then what you end up with, I feel like, and even the more you develop, it becomes a little bit more conventional mass building, you know, which again, once you start putting slabs and if you, you know, if you care to kind of explore those conditions, the building becomes even more conventional, because the sort of idea of three-dimensionality probably will be harder to sort of take on unless you radicalize it much more. So I'm much more interested, I mean, again, take it or leave it, because I know it's like only 3 weeks or whatever away, but it seems to me that there could be an alternative to your project that is maybe more radical, that is, you know, maybe like a sort of fuzzy mud building, you know, where like, you know, you begin to sort of leave these things on the ground and do something where people still have relationship to the ground. Maybe you still have the same idea of family living in different spaces, maybe split level or something, but it's not the sort of typical huge kind of condensed chunky building which we see there, because I feel that, versions of that, and it is an interesting way we kind of seen. Again, maybe I'm just anticipating something that I have not completely seen, and I can see terraces and all those things might actually lend itself to be different. But I think the other possible scheme is potentially more radical.
Okay. I totally agree with that, Marcelo. I just love in your project when you're just like literally putting those little plastic parts in a box and just like shaking them around. It's like the exact opposite of what we think of as the very serious activity of sort of urban planning. And and it kind of reminded me of the whole discussion of ADUs. And I probably totally missed it. I'm sure you were talking about that, but the fact that you were taking all the negatives behind the front house, the house fronts of blocks, and kind of dealing with that scale, I think is really smart, because that is something that a lot of people are thinking about now. And but just the idea of kind of the shake as opposed to the drawn out like zoning that we do and plan and the extrusions and all of that world, it just seemed very shocking and funny, but also serious in a way. And I agree. I do have a big, I got a lot of time for what you're trying to do with these strange shaped spaces. I do agree with you that there's a kind of violence to the assumption of the 8-foot internal space for human bodies that I just hate. And so the idea that this thing would start to have spaces which are actually more related to our postures these days, I don't know, playing with your iPhone on the carpet and leaning and lounging positions and zooming and all this stuff, and that you'd have these weirdly shaped rooms, like a low mat, empty space that's 4 feet tall and all that. I got a lot of time for that. That's really cool. But I just feel like it's not the best outcome or the most important outcome out of your process, like Marcelo said. So I don't know. I mean, you could kind of do both, but this thing almost seems too well behaved at the end.
Yeah, I was expecting after you do the shake, to then take the thing off so we can see the end product of the shake, but you kind of don't give us that reveal, because then it goes away and then we see the building already. And I wonder if the end product of the shake, we can actually learn something from that, the kind of misbehavior of the parts to introduce back into the building, but because it does behave so well right now.
But it's a very radical housing project if you think of it conceptually, because actually it's a housing project made of the spaces out between houses. So every house that is considered to be a norm, and has regulations for which it is thought, it is actually the opposite. That what is out of regulations makes the house. I have to say, I totally agree to there are many projects in you, but I think conceptually to make a housing out of the space we not live in, but the space in between becomes a space of the house, I think it's a really interesting idea. It's usually the space that is not thought for living turns into a space for living. Now, I agree that there are many different ways how the eventually end form can look like, but conceptually, I think it's an interesting idea. What Marcelo said, that you turn the urban void, the in-between, into...
Okay.
I wonder if I think Peter has a great point, and I wonder if you do go that direction, then I think the kind of introduction to that will be different. I think if you're, I just think the playfulness of the video introduces a kind of slightly different project, and then I guess there's both of them in this project at this point, and so clarifying how you want to go with it for the next 3 weeks would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Junkai, that was a big jump. That was a big jump.
Yeah.
I think we can take these comments and really, you can get to a great point. So thank you for the preparation, and I'll see you very soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. think we're up for our final four, which are from Tom Wiscombe's section. And I think the first student up is Manying.
Hi, I'm here.
Hello.
Hello. And can I start?
You may.
Hi everyone, I'm Manying, and let's start. This thesis starts from the position that architecture is a collection, and my approach to the pile of history that constitute architecture's material is one of play. The monument to the resistance at Tunnel is an unbuilt project for the Italian partisans in World War II. In this project, Rossi explores the concept of type in order to create a monument that uses the abstract, formal language to distinguish itself from the style of any particular historical period. In the creation of my own tunnel set, through copying, mirroring, scaling, and rotating, I have used the offset silhouette to convert the building from magazine to the graphic. Located in downtown LA, this thesis will constitute a tiny housing project that offers a new typology of the residential building. This kind of portrait architecture makes the work itself rather than the maxim to be the main architectural space. Furthermore, the architectural pattern generated by the programming diagram ensures that the building remains discrete but interrelated. Also, it provides an open and environmental friendly space for the district's community, whilst enabling the development of the playful urbanism. That's it, thanks.
Sorry, I was just late. I have only one question. Are these colors, do they represent an idea of program, or is it the color of the building?
I think the distribute of the color is from the idea of program, but the color itself is just itself, yeah.
Okay. So when I see a ground plan, what is the plan is only the volume. In the plans, I only see the volumes that are white. Is that right?
Yeah, because right now the color in the plan, the color is just like the outer space rather than. So
clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, sorry, maybe you mentioned something about Aldo Rossi in your introduction. Could you restate that? Sorry,
because the maxing right now is from Aldo Rossi's Tunnel project, so I just edit it and scale it and mirroring to be my maxing. Yeah.
I see. And you, I mean, sorry, I find this super interesting. I'm just trying to find the right framework. And your interest in Aldo Rossi was color, typological, or just the fact that it was maybe just more two-dimensional and offer kind of a possibility to sort of take that on? I mean, I'm just curious about that.
So what's your question?
Oh, what was the nature of your interest in Rossi's work?
I think the nature is two things. The one thing is his form and his abstract formal language, and the other thing is he's thinking about type, and the type, no matter what the time is, and it's timeless. It's a timeless form. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll take on that. I think, I mean, I find your proposal very interesting and graphically, just quite attractive and alluring. And I find your take on Rossi and producing this kind of sort of weird kind of enclosed worlds, sectional. I mean, we call it sectional objects, even though they're not traditional sectional object, which is a thing inside a thing. But these are sort of sectional forms, let's say, and super interesting. Let's say and the colors, for whatever it's worth, also, I mean, with Rossi in mind, they're more playful for sure. I don't think the putting together of these like 5 objects, it kind of works yet. I mean, not that it doesn't work. It's just it's kind of it's more like a kind of a lazy object at the scale of a city, let's say. And I would say, but one could kind of work from there. I feel like, finding some levels of integration while you still keep the certain kind of piling aspect of it. So I don't know. I mean, I find the forms each, quite interesting. They could produce incredibly sort of sectional agoras in some of the cases. Weird kind of a reconfiguration of the way normally we look at housing and residential typologies, especially recently in Los Angeles. So I feel like each one of those or all of them together, maybe with a little bit more care and in terms of how they actually come together. Could actually produce a quite fantastic building. I think you probably not a lot of time, but I think if you can actually take it on specifically, it could be. I think it has a lot of potential.
Yeah. Okay.
There's also something I don't know if I understand, but if it's Rossi, that there's always idea about the void space, the framing, yeah. So I think the idea that the courtyard is upside down or the window, there seems to be also something interesting that it looks like as if it's an urban plan, but it turned then vertical, yeah? So there's something also that what is usually thought to be a plan turns it into a section. That's what makes it suddenly this very strange cubic space. I think there's something interesting that the urban block turns into a cube, an urban cube or something, yeah? Yeah, where plan and section works. So there is some disciplinary architectural thoughts as well in your project, yeah? Like in Rossi, where the staircase becomes the house, yeah? Or the column becomes the building, yeah? Yeah, interesting project.
Thank you, Peter.
I do wonder if there is, I want to jump on the kind of like each of the parts there's a clear logic but the way that you put these pieces together, I do wonder if it should be tested some more, especially the parts in between, and like thinking. Sorry, there's a lot of noise here. Just thinking through the logic of like, the plan and the section and how you rotate and where it hits the other pieces. I just wonder a little more precision could be made when you put these things together and then test it as well.
Yeah, I will figure it out. Yeah.
I think there's still like one I mean, first of all, Mandy, I think I just want to say, I think it's got a lot of potential. I love that you are able to articulate what you're doing in terms of the disciplinary issues, but also in terms of a new building typology. I think it makes it feel very relevant to the time that we're living in. And it's smart to take on, you know, something with a social angle like tiny housing, and really start to look at how you can pack tiny housing into these weird little walls, you know, and it's just amazing for daylighting and all the other ways you can imagine, just like perusing through how those thin inhabitable walls might be great for housing. So I think it's really cool. I think like in the next month, I agree with Marcelo totally. You got to go like fully design this building and like treat it like a building now, and not just like 5 chunks, just sort of lightly stacked. That's how you made it, yes. But I think now it's like I think you have to make big decisions about the degree to which those 5 objects begin to start to have little local relationships with one another, both functionally, like imagining an elevator going all the way through too, but then also in terms of color and apertures and all of those kinds of things. There's a lot of work ahead on that. And I love that you put it in a real city. I think that's a big move forward for you, because, you know, before today, we were only looking at it with gray buildings in the city. So it looked like it just kind of fit in, like, oh, the whole city's a toy. Here's 5 more toys. It's just a toy. But seeing it like this in this raw, rough, dirty city just gets me going. I get really excited. I start to think about the ways that it could both stand out from, but also absorb some of the city around it. You know, so I think there's just a lot to work on here. But again, I really appreciate the dual discussion here. It's not just a disciplinary project, it's also a typological project, and it deals with an issue of today. So I think it's pretty cool what you've set up.
Thanks, Tom.
Sure.
Mandy, I know my mic is faint. I'm sorry. I'll remedy that in the future. If you can't hear me, you can email me later. I really like that it's in the city, and also this particular neighborhood. I think it sounds like you just landed it there, but I think if you wanted, there's a lot. Your idea of like small housing or tiny housing, you know, this area in the city kind of flourishes with like tiny shops, tiny offices, you know, but that still want and need storefront, right? So they're not like embedded in big corporate buildings. They still need to have air and people that can visit them. And so I wonder I'm not sure if you're able to take a walk around that neighborhood, but I think you'd be really surprised, even some of the shapes and colors that you're using are actually.
I think for me, I just see like
very
such a rich historical
in that area. I think it also, maybe my final comment would be, it also reminds me of like a hotel typology.
Back to, you know, I mean, this is really, it's kind of like
What's typology? Sorry, Kristy.
On steroids a little bit. And it also has some connection to some of the walkways. Experiments with kind of just extend structural materials to create a kind of a framework for future living in his own time in the 19th century. You know, if you go back and think about
thanks, Kristy.
how.
Okay. Sorry, I think I just I can email you, Mandy. Sorry.
Yeah, that would be clear. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you have any final questions?
No. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Who's the next? Housheng?
Hello. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So my thesis is a proposal of the new Lekman Museum, which is based on the model kit that I developed from the Sir John Soane Museum. From its first inception at Ashmolean, a museum has always been about collecting and displaying objects to the public. The curation from the Cabinet of Wonders to the modern gallery was seen as microcosm of civilization's creation. It encapsulated and miniaturized the awesomeness all over the world on different scales. Model kits are a museum on the small scales. Layouts all objects as parts and types. The weirdness of the scale changed how we read the architecture. Sir John Soane's museum in London, which nested several display rooms in a muted volume, is a huge model kit containing several subkits inside. I'm not only trying to emphasize the features of the interior space, the figures, and the outlines, but keep it developing to a recognizable model and reveal the secret of the museum. So this video was made based on the instructional drawings of the model kit. It shows the process to play with the parts. So to the model kit drawings world, here the model is scaleless. The parts are scaled, duplicated, and be assembled together to become components. This shows a lot of movement, like a part snap into another part, then become a new part. All these components have the potential and opportunities to shape a new project. Now the real site is thrown in, and here's the context around the existing legma. The type of the Soane museum were pulled out and reassembled on the legma site, like we play with the models. The parts act as proto-architecture to engage the site and develop programs. They are floating around, self-recognizing each other, and be assembled. The kit box with empty slots become the grounds. The compartment in the thick walls becomes exhibition rooms nested in a bigger space. The figures are treated as a playful part embedded in the interior volumes, snapped in the ground and stacked loosely, providing a tower posture facing to the Wilshire Boulevard. It's an exploration of the new type of museum that developed from the model kitology, and also re-understand the architecture from a model perspective. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Finished?
Yep.
Oh, okay. No, I think it's a very intriguing thing, and you know what I always like of in this kind of project is since they all start with a certain building. Yeah, I'm always interested in what comes out. Yeah, by reassembling the parts. And I think what seems to be unique. I don't know if I understand the final project, but it looks like as if the whole museum becomes a gigantic vitrine to the outside. So what was before a room in the interior, yeah, becomes a vitrine on the outside. Yeah, is that how the tower suddenly works? So the tower is not a really extrusion volume, yeah, but it looks like it is an exhibition space or into the public. So it's actually a gigantic vitrine. Is that right? I understand the final project that that if you look at the rendering.
It's kind of like the relationship, like a thing nested into another thing, or like space in a space, like a program embedded in another program. I think that is the feature what I found in the Sir John Soane's museum. So I try to kind of like correspond this relationship in the tower scheme.
Well, but it looks like what becomes a decoration in the final project is what was before an interiority. So what you see in the outside is actually what was before an interior. I think it could become a very interesting building once that the interiority becomes its facade. Yeah, I don't know. Perhaps I just think about this one rendering you had on the site. Yeah, where you saw the red spaces outside.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's super interesting project, and I do agree with Peter. I think there is an interesting take that because of all the let's say all the sequester chunks and pieces and shapes you got from the Sir John Museum seem to also be cut. No, they are exposing something. So there's obviously a kind of some sort of figuration in all in the clustering of all these pieces, but the fact that all those pieces are exhibiting something to the outside, which is demarcated in red most of the time, I think it makes it interesting. It's a good point. I'm just talking and thinking about the comment that Peter made about this idea of vitrine. I think that could be a cool way to maybe talk about what a museum is today, if you could kind of relate to it. I mean, it is a gigantic project, obviously, and then so I think from the scale of a John Soane museum to this, there is a big leap. But of course, you mentioned the fact that these pieces are scaleless, which I think is actually interesting. I mean, this is such a loaded site at LACMA, which it's hard to escape, and then sort of many projects have been kind of made there, and of course there's one project which maybe is the wrong one from all of the ones that have been made that still remains, but so that I'll refrain from taking on that. I do think it's interesting what you're doing. It's maybe too large, but again, I mean, I think it's actually an interesting way to kind of take it on. I will make more about I think the question is I mean, of course, I'm thinking of Tom's work, and he's your advisor, and so I mean, he's the idea of this collection, the idea of putting this thing in this kind of game board, and how these things begin to kind of get out from there, if they are their own beings in a way, and they enter into another sort of interplay, like if it was a theater, let's say. I think that's super interesting. I think you probably want to make sure that there is something at the end, and I would say the vitrines is an interesting case because it kind of brings back the John Soane Museum, but in a very different way. I would try to maybe reflect on that, elaborate on it, and see what actually does it make for your project in a way, for the actual building that comes out of their project. Yeah. So
I also wonder. I think the project leading up to the kind of final assembly of the parts seems very clear, and it makes a lot of sense of how you're doing it. But I watched that animation several times of how you kind of click things on, and I do think there may be a few more iterations that you might play with, and I also wonder when I look at especially this screen, the difference between this part versus that part, and something about what Peter was talking about, it's almost like in the one on the left, it's like the interior, it's a cut and the interior is kind of revealed, versus somehow the ones on the right feels more like a window and a balcony rather than a kind of revealing of the interior space. And I do wonder if you might want to do more of that, and what kind of triggers it to go from a more abstracted versus something that seems to be revealing. I would play with that trick a little bit more in how you like kind of iterate on this further.
I've only also one question. The mat building, the plinth underneath, is that also part of your project?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So you had, but that background comes not from the swans part, or?
Sorry, you mean which one?
Sorry, I make it. Perhaps I misunderstand. 1 second.
Yeah.
So that whole plinth here, this thing. See my drawing?
Yeah.
Is it?
So yeah, so that's also the part of my design. So I think.
But that staircase, for example, comes from the Cormac Center in IIT. So are there also parts from different projects in here, that are white, and so you should see them, but you don't see them. So are there other buildings in here that frame the background for the swans part? I don't know. Somehow it seems like there is something more to that. Or it looks like this.
Yeah, Peter, you're totally right. I mean, if you look, like I'm drawing now too, like you see like the sawtooth roof of the B-cam, and then it's starting to appear too in here, like parts that are otherwise sourced than just from the Sohn Museum. It's interesting. It's just not like a complete idea yet.
Are we supposed to be hearing sound? I don't hear anything.
Well, anyway, I don't know. I think that's something that would be worth like clearing up more, Jack, because you did frame it in a very linear way. Like I started with John Sohn, I stole parts from it, I scaled and reorged them to make this project. But there are these other things that are present, and it seems like you'd want to kind of clear up like how important that part of the project is to you, so that it can be you can kind of theorize it. And I also agree with Jenny's kind of first like knee-jerk reaction seeing it, that I think the whole first part of your presentation is awesome, and I just love the model kits and the drawings, these vibrating drawings that are like alive. But then I feel like something happens with this thing and it kind of solidifies too much almost into a monolith, or something happens where it gets a little overwrought. And I think it would be worth like going at it again a few times in the same method of kind of like playfulness and scaling and all of that, to see like what other possibilities there are. Because, frankly, you have the time to do it. So yeah, I mean, I would just kind of work on this tower thing again. Like what else could that be?
Also, I don't know if this is, I mean, I wanted to take on the problem of the plinth, which seems to be an incredible architectural artifice to create coherence or some level of coherence or otherwise, disparate pieces. And it's one of the things that, I don't know, personally, I have a bit of a conundrum, because I mean, as an architect, I love it because it actually solves a lot of things for us. As a citizen, I'm always a little bit suspicious about what it produces. I wonder if you could maybe, like in doing what Tom was suggesting, of a few other kind of takes of putting this together, you could try to do so and try to maybe avoid the plinth and have a much more sort of playful relationship with the ground, where pieces could create something where, of course, you need the plinth, and maybe you need something that actually kind of connects all together, but it's not just one kind of massive thing. It could be an interesting thing which might give you, in that particular site, a bit of a kind of porosity with the edges, you know, of the rest of the park, which, you know, you kind of need that. That's why you're actually hinting at the stair and so on, which is a good way of like connecting down without necessarily erasing the plinth. But I wonder if there's maybe another way there, you know, with smaller parts and so on, which might actually kind of be a way for you to make almost a kind of weird contextual argument, because LACMA, it's really a kind of it's sort of an additive idea of many, many different objects over time, you know.
I mean, I've just
Jack, I don't.
Yeah.
I know it's really faint. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I also put a note in the chat. I think where you've ended up, there seems to be a really interesting topic of display, which I think, you know, the packaging of toys has in the beginning part, right? How the toys are packaged and display certain parts and not others. So that just seems like something, as you're working this out as a building, that I would amplify. And just as a reference, I can't help but think of things like old car retail buildings, like the original one, the Citron building in Paris. I'll send you a link. But that how, like this, because the scale of your display is so huge, that it might be interesting to look at building types that had to have huge, very huge windows, and we're displaying very large items, such as, you know, cars. Not that you need to display cars, but that may maybe help kind of pull the spectrum from like the John Soane Museum, where display is kind of intricate and internal, to you kind of turning it inside out and shifting the scale.
And also, I think you are dealing with two very unique museum typologies, you know, the generic box, you know, called the Kunsthall, the empty space that can be filled, yeah? And then the Galleria, the room to room to room, the idea that every room is an exhibition space. But I think what you do is you try to develop a new idea of museum, yeah, you know, by these large windows, and I think about that if you have a final review, some people might ask you, you know, what kind of typology is that you are developing here in relationship to, I don't know, the history of museums, yeah, that I think have this discrepancy between the empty box, yeah, you know, and the idea of the, let's say, sculpture in a room, or the room to room museum.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, Peter. And I totally think that you could do this, Jack, like, you know, kind of like we saw in Mandy's project, where there's this like disciplinary work that you're doing in your case with the model kit, and the issues of display and compartments and all the stuff from Soane, which is really cool. But then literally, like, today, what is this thing's contribution to that historical lineage of museum? I think if it does both, I think that immediately levels your project up.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack. Do you have any final questions?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you all for the feedbacks.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. The next student is Deepak.
Yes, we'll be presenting in group. Deepak and Chia. Do we start?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So our thesis is called Hirschhorn in Los Angeles. Today, as urban living is challenging by the COVID pandemic, an issue of access and justice, which are increasingly difficult to ignore, we need to imagine new forms of inhabitation that combine the social life and small carbon footprint affordable by dense city living with healthy for and spatial generous environment. Shaifa's moody, mysterious dream towers were always strangely more appropriate to the film noir landscape of Los Angeles than they were ever at home in the infinite grip of New York.
You guys need to give me a minute. There has been some internet lag. We need to start again. That's why you might not be able to see any videos. Sorry about that.
Oh, so you want me to start again?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. So. I didn't see anything.
No. Do you want to screen share? Probably some problem. I don't know. It's weird.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I can do screen share.
Weird. Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Yeah. We start.
Wait. Let me change one. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's kind of. Okay. So our thesis is called Ferris in Los Angeles. Ferris, oh, sorry. Is something like lagging here?
I don't know. Yeah, there's some big internet issue right now. Let's see. God.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Just try that again. So yes, okay. Today, as urban living is challenged by COVID pandemic, issues of access and justice, which are increasingly difficult to ignore, we need to imagine new forms of inhabitations that combine the social life and small carbon footprint affordable by density with healthy for and spatial generous environment. Shaifa's moody, mysterious dream towers were always strangely more appropriate to the film noir landscape of Los Angeles than they were ever at home in the infinite grid of.
This thesis starts with a collection of Ferris-inspired forms and silhouettes and proceeds of mine their as yet unrealized potentials through various transformations, copy, scale, rotate, slice, before setting them down in LA. We started with choosing locations in Los Angeles, and we reached Culver City as our site, which is the center of education, tech, business, retail, entertainment. But with all these activities, Culver City has been the only growing in terms of cost of living drastically. In last 20 years, the increase in population is just by 1,000 people, and we can say a number of houses has increased by just 284. The travel time has been around 30 minutes, where 42% comprise of traveling more than 30 minutes a day, just one way. This also says that we also see a jump of 13,000 jobs in last 2 years, converging our project to this. The results become a series of architectural surprises, buildings nested within the buildings rather than straight interiors divided from exteriors, mute exteriors without reference to the usual human scale of windows, doors, and balconies, and strange playful relationship to the ground plane and the surrounding city. Density is dramatically increased. The horizontal orientation of the existing context is challenged, and the green spaces, plazas, and the other areas of public life are multiplied above and below the single datum of the city's existing pedestrian surface.
So this is one.
I think you might have lost us. I drift.
So I think this is one of our interior chunks where we show the civic lab, which shows walkable cities, how dynamic they are, and what kind of activities actually happens within the space. So this is the shell. It's mainly used for the business, and the city within is used for living and and public service. This thesis addresses social and political concerns by combining hyperdensity with mega-scale outdoor areas, and we use these plans to plan from different cities, like European cities, also downtown Los Angeles, to show a contrast between existing and speculative cities, which created by us is a new lively, walkable, and carbon-free city above the ground of Los Angeles. And yes, last but not least is the midterm models we made.
The one you see here.
Where is that model, you guys? Is it there with you in your room?
Right here.
Let's see it. Love it.
We're so sorry about some internet issues, but for this time, we kind of threw everything on. Just want to discuss like all the aspects in terms of the final presentation. This is kind of like a draft version to talk from the initial about the researchers, the background, the site we're choosing, and the design logic, and some of the interior stuff we're trying to produce right now.
You see, I think it's a unique project, but I sometimes think it would be really interesting if you turn it a little bit more towards an idea of a thesis. And what I mean by that is, when you mentioned Ferris, yeah, and the idea of the mega form and the idea of the gigantic building, yeah, you know, or the Raymond Hood, I think it plays into this idea of what a megaform or a gigantic monument means. Yeah, it's interesting. It looks like it's a hybrid between a building and a monument to me. You know, it's like it has pyramid characteristic. It has ziggurat. You know, but at the same time, it is just a high rise. So perhaps there is something to be said about the idea of bigness, yeah, or the megaform, or the character of this building. I think it's a very beautiful project. You know, I think I saw it in Is it not? I think it came out of one of your.
Actually, it's a continued version of what we did for last semester, the vertical.
Yeah. No, so I know a little bit the story where it comes from, but I would wish that you can say something about its character. You know, it's because Ferris' idea was he was a renderer. He wanted to how to say, he wanted to give. I mean, I know when Kohlhaas shows Ferris, he would render the public space as a light, and the building would be dark. So the building is not the obstacle that is being seen; it is the space between the buildings. So there was a whole idea, what these renderings of Ferris wanted to reveal as a city, and I think the size matters in your case, and I think there is something to be said as a thesis, There was also a whole history about, I just know, there was also a whole history about centralization to use density to make a building, but I like the character of it, the monument versus the building versus the city. It's an utilitarian, symbolic, but then strange, or let's say out of space entity. And then it has this Tesla factory symbol. It looks like from a James Bond movie. You know what I mean? Has some very strange characteristics.
Yeah, I agree with. I mean, it's a beautiful project. I think the model is amazing. I'm sure. I mean, I just saw first I wasn't sure whether it was actually a rendering of a background, but then I saw you moving, and it's got to be a model. So it's actually a beautiful project. I think Peter makes a good point about how to maybe make a stronger conceptual text to make it more of a thesis than a project. And so I don't, for me at least, a couple of points. It seems to me that the approach to the site, for all of your correct understanding of Culver City and what the development there seem to be a little superficial, like it's just like landed there, and I could see that being maybe part of the thesis, but still it's not problematic enough to kind of to offer anything back. So I like the idea of Hugh Ferris, in LA, and I like the fact that you kind of taken from what were meant to be only definitions of massings and building envelope, created a kind of interior that seemed somewhat consistent to it. So it feels to me that there maybe, as a thesis, I would maybe dwell a little bit there as well, in terms of what is what does massing means, in the context of there could be a critique of today's development trends, where basically FAR and massing and sort of building right to the edge of what maximum allowable trends, which is, one of the differences in LA to New York is that in LA you don't have the sort of beautiful setback that actually begins to create towers that such as what Hugh Ferris actually envisioned, and then now Jean Nouvel is building for the MoMA tower. In LA it's all straight, so that's all just, let's say, if you want to do that, it's only about design. So I feel like, as sort of thesis go, maybe you could actually kind of go back to Ferris and make that kind of transition and the difference of what those volumes might mean in Los Angeles. And then maybe have some kind of other, I don't know, the site I'll have to consider a little bit more, but maybe you guys have already information and find a way to actually make it happen, to make it more believable, or take it out altogether and just show it in the city in a kind of a undisclosed location, let's say.
I love this specific piece. Is really, really beautiful, and somehow maybe it's the proportion of there's more gold and black, and and the other pieces seems more black than gold. And this is also the only piece the gold comes to the ground. And I wonder if having the gold to the ground is a way to somehow engage the fabric of the city. And the one piece that does, it seems like, haven't figured quite out is the one that kind of fell over and how it lands. And it is the most disruptive to the urban fabric. And I do wonder how it situates and whether that could be also more precise.
I wanted to ask you guys on the jury about the sort of, I do think it's a bit schizophrenic right now, because the project comes from the mysterious, illustrations of Ferris, but then it also has this thing that it feels kind of like a Dutch quality to it, where it starts to get programmed, and the everyday stuff of McDonald's and Amazon and all of that are starting to get inserted into it. And I've been kind of like, I've been waiting for this review to see how you guys would react to that. I think it maybe is possible with a kind of magic trick to bring it all together, but it's definitely not forms of representation that we see mixed together very often. And I was just wondering what you guys thought about that.
You see, the interesting thing is a city has always a symbolic character, I mean, and I think there is something in this project, that cannot be denied of its symbolicness, yeah? But this idea that you have a city like as if it's an entirety of a mountain, yeah? It plays with some of these images. I mean, there is an image in this project. Yeah, it wants to. You look at this. It wants to say something. At the same time, it cannot. It cannot be understood as a kind of turbo capitalism. Where basically what the Rockefeller Center was. Like I buy 3 blocks and we make. It was like the idea of how capitalism could work in the future of Manhattan. Yeah, so there is a lot of, and then there comes Kohlhaas with his, I don't know if you know this project, the hyper building of Bangkok, yeah, which in principle was this gigantic building, yeah, turning it into a city, yeah. So I think it plays with a history of the idea of the city as a building, yeah, but what is added to it is its iconographic character. There's something very strange in this pyramidic, monumental, out of, that is, in Hugh Ferris, it was the envelope, like what Marcelo said, it was this zoning law. Actually, what Ferris did is he represented the envelope as the regulations. Not the regulation, it is a symbol. Yeah. So I think that's where, to me, the project lies. It plays on a symbolic level. It plays on a capitalist, turbo capitalist, and it plays on an iconographic level. Yeah, on an idea. I think you underestimate that drawing that I see now, because I think if you place it into the left drawing into a building, into the urban plan, you would see suddenly its scale, yeah, and it reminds me to the biggest, the biggest building that has been built in China, 500 by 500 meter big building. Have you seen that? So I think it plays within a contemporary production of typologies, but it has a totally different, strange symbolism. The goldness, the blackness, the pyramidicness. I think the thesis lies somewhere in these two things. Does capitalism has an image? Or has it nothing to do with money? And is it like an utopian Tesla out of space star?
I mean, for me, it's the reason why I'm torn about it is because for me, it actually gets weirder when you start to imagine the capital required to do it, and that capital is no longer available to cities and counties, but rather to a company like Apple or Tesla that could literally buy this and pay for it. And,
Yeah.
But I don't want to disturb the mysterious quality, the kind of unknowability of the forms by only talking about that stuff. So I don't often see projects that are able to bridge those two worlds.
The only danger is in this such project is that it shouldn't become a kind of logo, a company logo, a logo building. There was there was in the Netherlands. I remember we in studio were doing buildings where the logo of the company could be seen from an airport. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an urban fabric. So I think. Yeah, I mean, I think you don't want to go into that direction. Yeah, that the logo becomes the. Anyhow, I think it's a very interesting project because it plays within all these genres that usually don't meet.
Yeah, I agree. I think it doesn't want to become a logo, but I was thinking as you were talking that it's a lot more like a 1950s like headquarters building than it is like a shopping mall. And so it might have something to do with the scale of the branding. Like the fact that McDonald's is on one floor and then Amazon's on another floor. I think the scale of the branding might be how you could bridge that difference, Tom, between it feeling like it's just things getting tacked on and the monumental aspect of the city.
But you see, then we are in this debate about the first towers, like the Woolworth building. Yeah, what facade do we put on? The whole debate between Gothic style versus Art Deco. Yeah, or it becomes like a church that produces a kind of collectiveness to the outside. Yeah, while at the same time it has to be vertical. So what is the pyramidic thing meaning? So I think it's interesting what you say, Kristy, that it's a company is building a city. Yeah. Now the question is, what is now its iconography? What kind of shape is it? And perhaps the pyramid is a really interesting thing, because the pyramid, the pyramid also has a very strange symbolism. Yeah. I mean, it is not, it doesn't come always with very good things, yeah. So, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's something very dark about this project, and not just the Hugh Ferris angle. I agree completely. It feels like a center of power. It reminds me of Blade Runner, the Tyrell Corporation. I mean, there's a lot of stuff like underlying this thing, but it's also, I don't know. I also find it kind of humorous and playful, like Frank Lloyd Wright doing Deco in Los Angeles, and that also kind of genre. So I don't know. I think it's good to play to really split it here and like really try to deal with both, not turn it into this rarefied project that's that's just totally about like sort of abstract representation, but try to interface it with the world and deal with this power structure that would be totally wound up with making a structure like this in the world. I think it's worth taking on.
You see, what I think, Tom, is interesting here. I don't know if it's right, but I remember when perhaps it has a lot to do what Hegel tries to describe the symbolic architecture, the Tower of Babylon. And, many people have used then the Tower of Babylon, yeah, as a political statement. It was either Georges Bataille, it was the deconstructivists use it as a collapse of culture, So perhaps there is something in this, in the tower, yeah, or in this pyramidic tower that can be used, yeah, as an expression of today's conflictual or perhaps it's a non-sign, or I remember what Holland used, the amorphic architecture, the architecture before culture, you know, how is it called? The dolmen architect, you know, the architecture before the architect. Yeah. I mean, there is, it plays a role into that for me. What's the symbolism of that? That's why I think it's risky, but it's worth to debate. Yeah. How does a contemporary company would make a symbol for his collective city?
Totally. I think that's so helpful, Peter, that you're kind of like pulling back and looking at it as a symbol. We got to talk more about that, I think.
Awesome. You guys have any final questions?
I think that was great. That was a great critique. We loved it.
Yeah, that's good, Peter.
Thank you. Okay, we have the final student.
Yeah.
I think we just did the final student.
Oh, I thought you had on the list.
These guys are a pair. I have 4 students, but 1 pair.
Perfect. Well, then we finish on time.
Yes.
Even with the few bumps along the way. So thank you all for joining us for midterm. It's so important to have your feedback to kind of redirect and refine things in these final weeks. So we really appreciate all the students' work and certainly the time and energy of the jury. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Nice
Thank
work,
you.
everyone.
Yeah, great job.
Great
That
work.
was awesome. Yeah.
Great work.
Okay.
Marcelo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Hi, Florencia. See you later.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Jenny.
Bye, guys. Thank you.